Hello, everyone. My name is Trisha Butler. I'm a grad student at American Military University. This presentation is called The Enigma of Ancient Druidry, and it was produced for an assignment in History of Religion. This presentation will attempt to illuminate the challenging ancient religion of Druidry. Before diving into that task, we should establish that Druids and most of early or pre Christian Celtic religions are considered pagan. The term pagan was adopted by early Christians to delineate all other religions from the Abrahamic ones, particularly those with polytheistic practices. While Christians and some secular individuals tend to use the term pagan pejoratively, many modern adherents to faiths like Old Norse, Wicca, or Neo Druidry have reclaimed the word and are not adverse to wearing the label. Although I just mentioned modern Druidism, this research focused on the history of Druids and their socio religious practices and responsibilities. With that, we'll move into historical origins. As noted previously, Druid history is ancient, and because of that, their timeline varies within the literature. This research revealed the earliest mention of Druids by Sotion of Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE, but none of his writings survived. Socion's reference to Druids was, however, cited by Diogenes Laertius in the 3rd century CE. Some modern Druids trace their craft back tens of thousands of years, and the religion has survived in certain forms. But for the purpose of this historical analysis, we will accept that recorded history shows Druids to be most prevalent between 3rd century BCE until their decline during Roman occupation in the 2nd century CE. And all of the data on this slide came from Ronald Hutton's Blood and Mistletoe and Diogenes Laertius' Lives and Opinions of Philosophers. Moving on to the second part of historical origins. Many of the oldest accounts of Druids were written by Romans, including Tacitus, Strabo, and Julius Caesar. Although Caesar is likely the only one who directly engaged with Druids. But regardless of whether Caesar's account constitutes a primary source, the Roman records of Druids are those of a conquering foreigner, and we should be cognizant of their inherent bias. That said, no direct texts from the Druids exist, as they counted their religion too sacred to commit to writing. The only exception is a fragmented bronze artifact called the Collini calendar, which was unearthed in 1847 France and subsequently dated to the 3rd century CE. And the picture there is of that calendar. The Gaulish religious relic was deliberately destroyed and evidences both Celtic culture and Latin writing. That the destruction was deliberate, and in lieu of texts confirming suppression of the indigenous religion, the remnant was ostensibly recovered from a consecrated site. The information on this slide comes from Jill Harry's Collini calendar. All right, the geographic spread. Druidism followed the migration of Celtic culture from Gaul, the region that is now known as northern France, and then into the British Isle and Ireland. These three distinct regions had unique Druidism, but commonly held practices. W.F. Tamblyn actually argued that Britons never practiced Druidry, rather that it was strictly Gallic, and that the Druids were on the Roman side. Tamlin does admit to Druidism in Ireland, which is logical because Rome never occupied the island, and thus the religion was not subjugated there. The information on this slide is from W.F. Tamlin's British Druidism and the Roman War Policy. All right, core beliefs and practices. Something compelling that this research revealed is that the Celts, who were Indo-European, held beliefs that align with Vedic law. Two examples are Druid hierarchy, often referred to as a caste, and the belief in reincarnation. Like most pagan faiths, Druidry leads heavily into nature. Pliny the Elder spoke to this in his first century natural history, where he noted that mistletoe and oak were most sacred to Druids. Likewise, we learn from Posidonius of Apamea via Strabo that Druids believed the human soul and universe were everlasting. While Posidonius and the Roman writers agreed that Druids were a powerful societal class, who they recognized as priests, the former considered Druids to be virtuous philosophers of nature. In contrast, Romans most often referred to Druidry as barbaric, like a captor might, and inordinately fixated on the ideas of human sacrifice. This is not entirely dissimilar to blood libel that was levied at Jews centuries later. We know from the Collini calendar that the Druids were also astronomers. This is often correlated with Stonehenge and other stone circles, but archaeology and historical record does not corroborate that supposition. Finally, there is no surviving and conclusive cosmology, but some accounts mention that Druids directly descended from a god. In yet another Hindu correlation, some Druids ascribe to a similar mythology of the Brahmins, that their forebears utilized elemental power to themselves create the universe and world. The information on this slide can be found in Teresa Cross's Secret of the Druids, The Natural History of Pliny the Elder, Philip Freeman's War, Women, and Druids, and J.A. McCulloch's Religion of the Ancient Celts. So let's talk about interpretations. It is important to repeat the more compelling interpretations of Druidry as well as the most obnoxious. We shall start with the latter. The Roman perspective is a demonized version of the religion from a conqueror's perspective. That energy inspired pseudo-history and eventually a romanticized version of the Druids. The comparison of Hindu traditions with Druidry is among the most fascinating, and that evaluation comes from scholars like Peter Beresford Ellis and Teresa Cross. There is another interesting interpretation that I didn't cover in this presentation, and that comes from Stuart Piggott, who considered the implementation of Druidry as a tool of indigenous homogeny and idealistic nationalization. And in conclusion, Druidism is ancient and elusive, particularly because the traditions were strictly passed down orally. Further, any remnants or sacred sites were ruined by invaders. The religion relies on the natural world and harmony with it. The Druids were a highly respected caste in Celtic societies. In many cases, kings could not make decisions without their approval. In other instances, Druids were the ruling socio-religious class. Druids were judges, healers, seers, arbitrators, priests, teachers, and philosophers, and that list is not exhaustive. Written histories are scarce, so we must glean all we can from what is existent. The archaeological record of Druidry is almost non-existent, but perhaps future discoveries and technological advancements will reveal more of this ancient past. In the meantime, we will continue to study sites like the Owl of Unismon, Wispens Wood, Newgrange World Heritage Site, and even Stonehenge, while we wonder if the Druids might just be the answer. Finally, you can see here in these graphics that I've included two pictures of Neolithic burial tombs or mounds that are both rumored or suspected to have had something to do with Druids, although they're a little far past the time frame that I established in this presentation. And of course, a beautiful picture of Stonehenge. And here's my bibliography. Thank you so much for watching.